As the world struggles with depleting energy supplies, Asian economies bear the brunt. Trickling down to the poorest, South and Southeast Asians are left fighting to fuel basic transport and even cook their food. Will the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran ultimately punish the poor and dramatically increase the ever-widening global wealth gap? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. The economic fallout from closing the Strait of Hormuz is mind-boggling. Every country has felt the effect, but arguably nowhere more so than in Asia. From the loss of remittances from millions of expats employed in the Gulf, to small and medium-sized businesses unable to run machinery, and everyday workers struggling to secure transport. It's not only hindering growth, it runs the grave risk of damaging social cohesion. But if there is an upside, the cold turkey cessation of oil and gas imports could expedite the transition to a green economy. Here's a look.
For a country trying to position itself as a valuable mediator between the US and Iran, Pakistan is not faring well in the ongoing oil and gas crisis. Fuel and electricity shortages have begun affecting daily life as the impact fans out into society.
Due to shortage of power, we are closing down the shop by the government regulation around 8 o'clock. Before it, we were closing around 10:30, and we are losing customers because they can't come at before 8.
It's a story replicated across much of South and Southeast Asia. Restaurants in India are finding it tougher to even do the basics.
Commercial gas is not available at all right now, and we are not allowed to use domestic cylinders. So, we have brought in or are using firewood to keep things running, and even that is not working properly. We are unable to fulfill customers' orders. People come in but leave without getting served.
In India's city of Firozabad, the centuries-old tradition of glassmaking is at risk as workers face joblessness because their furnaces face gas shortages. Glassmaking might seem like a trivial industry compared to farming, logistics or transport. But India's economy is heavily dependent on small and medium businesses, and its many factories are thirsty for imported fuel. What happens here is not just a snapshot of a single industry, but an unnerving harbinger of what might await India as a whole. The government is doing its best to calm those concerns.
Please do not believe in rumors. We have adequate supplies of liquefied petroleum gas, petrol and diesel. The price is stable. There has been no increase in the prices. Please avoid panic buying and buy LPG petrol and diesel according to your needs.
In spite of those reassurances, rising prices and salary cuts have fueled panic and anger.
We aren't getting gas, and we have small kids at home.
In Bangladesh, petrol station queues lasting hours have been reported.
What is the time now? I came here at 8 a.m. Now it is 1:30 p.m. Now you calculate how long I have been here.
The Philippines is particularly concerned about fuel. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. declared a national energy emergency in late March. 98% of the nation's crude oil supplies come from the Middle East. The president said it has enough oil to last until the 30th of June and is working to find other supplies. But the country only held an estimated 45 days' worth of reserves at the start of the crisis. Fleets of boats, ships and ferries that crisscross waterways and seas to keep the country moving are a highly fuel-hungry sector. The conflict in the Middle East has also caused major disruptions to labour markets. Some economists estimate up to a 35% drop in remittances from workers in Gulf states to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and other neighbouring countries. India alone could face $5 to $10 billion in annual losses. Many Asian nations applied various measures in the wake of the crisis. Some have placed subsidies on petrol as prices continue to increase. Other measures have included cutting to a 4-day workweek or increasing remote working to curb vehicle use. But in the short term, there is no getting around the region's abject dependence on Middle Eastern oil. and the clock is ticking on a resolution.
Well, joining me now to speak further about the impact on South and Southeast Asian economies are from New Delhi, President of the Imagindia Institute, Robinder Sachdev; from Manila, political science professor at the University of Santo Tomas, Froilan Calilung; and from London, founder of Dhaka Forum, Ashfaq Zaman. Thank you all so much for being with me. We're already looking at countries with some of the highest poverty rates in the world, massive wealth gaps, as well as populations that, don't hesitate to rise up when they feel their governments aren't delivering. So, Robinder, how destabilizing is the crisis in the Gulf for South Asian economies, especially if it's prolonged?
The key lies in, especially if it is prolonged. As of now, India is managing, and South Asia, sure, we're going through our turmoil. But if this crisis persists, then it will certainly have an impact, and I think across three areas. One, there's a thumb rule out here that we look at that every $10 of increase in crude oil prices can have an impact of about 0.2 to 0.5% of India's GDP. So if there's a $30 increase in the price of oil for a longer time period, it could mean shaving off of India's GDP by anywhere from 0.5% to about 1 to 1.5%. That's the GDP impact. Inflation separate. The other impact, I think, which is very critical, is on the remittances. India gets remittances to the tune of about $35 to $40 billion from the wider West Asia and the GCC countries, with losses of jobs, tourism sectors, and other things. So a lot depends upon how the GCC region plays out. Job losses and such would mean fall in remittances, which would be actually even more acute for Pakistan, Bangladesh, because they depended even more on the brethren in these regions. And thirdly, I would say even in investments. For example, in India, the UAE has committed to a $75 billion investment over a period of till 2030 under a big vision plan. Saudis, $100 billion. Now, with their own reconstruction and with their own increased expenditure in defenses, I doubt how much of those commitments they would look forward to. So there will be a cascading impact on the economy and jobs in the country.
Okay, cascading impact, but Robinder, very quickly, what's the time scale before we see the worst of those impacts that you've described?
I think the time scale when we'll start feeling the acute impact would be in the next 3 to 6 months. Because so far, you see, even the previous cargoes are still landing up on Indian shores or other countries, right? Iranian, shadow fleets and other from Hormuz, which have exited. It takes typically a month, 6 weeks, 2 months to reach the, destination. So still we have those supplies coming in. The real impact would start coming in the next 3 to 6 months, I do feel.
Okay. Let me turn to Froilan, because the Philippines had already, declared a state of energy emergency, and now we're hearing there's just about a month and a half left of fuel supply. So paint us a picture of what's happening in your country, and can the government mitigate the damage with subsidies? Until what point, or is the day of reckoning really pretty close to come?
Well, actually, the horizon does not really loom well for the Philippines generally, though it's the very first country in the whole world to actually declare a national state of energy emergency. But I think the systemic and systematic mechanisms of reforms are not yet in place, even as we speak at the moment. So we have very thin oil reserves at the moment. At the same time, we're also going to deal with the problem of food security in the long run, primarily because of the increasing price of fertilizers, which is very much needed by an agricultural-based economy, just like the Philippines. And I believe that the vulnerability is actually great, certainly because we do not have, at the moment, a great deal of the presence of renewable energy like solar, even geothermal energy, and other rare earth material minerals. They are not really in abundance at the moment in the country. So couple this with the fact that we are dealing right now with a lot of political noise, primarily because of the impeachment complaint being hurled against the vice president. So I think that is really giving us a lot of problems right now.
Yeah.
Less of governance, too much of politics, and I think it really compounds the situation that we're in at the moment.
Right. So, what's your greatest fear in how this could culminate?
Well, I think what is imperative here, I think, is really for the government to come up with structural and systemic reforms, not just piecemeal solutions to the problem, not just giving us um, um, cash aids, just for them to be able to cushion the effect. I think it should really be a long-term planning that should have been in place, but unfortunately, we don't have that. So we just need to brace for the impact of this. Like I said, in the case of India, they're looking at it at the 3 to 6 month time. I think in the case of the Philippines, we're looking at a little earlier time frame for us to be able to feel the brunt of all of the crisis. Right now, the prices of basic commodities are already increasing. Inflation is really spiking at the same time. Even if we are currently in the planting season, but by the end of the year, when we go to the harvest season, I think we will be able to feel that there is decreased harvest, especially
Yeah.
of high value, high crop yields. That will really create a big dent on the economy in the long
And
run.
will people take to the streets?
Right now, there is not much of that at the moment, which is a good indication that at least the people are still very much vigilant, but still hopeful. And because I think if we go out in the street, that will further complicate the matter. So
Yeah.
I think for as long as the government is will be able to deliver, I think we're good.
Okay. Ashfaq, in Bangladesh, the social ecosystem is still very fragile, really, after the overthrow of Sheikh Hasina. So, how much is this increase in economic pressure really frustrating that equation as well?
Yeah, I mean it's a concern, and you know that we had a very fragile economy after the uprising, and after that we had the interim government, and right after that, the economy was already in shock. You know, we had a lot of corruption where many of the funds, where the reserve funds of Bangladesh were also looted. It was all across the world, and right after that, hitting us with this energy crisis, I think this is a very tough situation, particularly for the government, as they are trying to figure out what to do. And I think the people understands this, so the emotions are that okay, we are accommodating of it, but then again, there's a time limit for it as well, because at the end of the day, if your lights are out, then everything stops in the city as well. We have not hit in that region yet, but of course, like with the long queues in the fuel pumps and in the gas pumps, and also the price hike, people are starting to feel the heat. But I think we are still being optimistic that somehow we'll be able to pass the situation.
Yeah. Do you have confidence in the government to mitigate what's happening to at least avoid, severe destabilization? And as you mentioned, feeling the heat in Bangladesh, the summer isn't far away, and there's going to be demand for air conditioning, and if fuel's not there, it's not going to be easy for the people and for the economy.
Well, summer is already here. We've got 10 months summer. So, yeah, of course, like the last few days, it was raining in Dhaka from what I've heard. Of course, yes. I think it's going to be difficult, but I think the government has enough, as they've declared, that they have enough stock for at least 1 month. And they are actually trying to sort of open up to a diversification as well. I can see the embassy reaching out to African nations. I'm sure they have reached out to Algeria, to Nigeria, and they're trying to also do spot buying from the Singapore market. Of course, it's straining a lot in the economy. So we are not seeing a shortage of fuel, to be honest. It's more about ensuring the distribution at this point of the time, which is a bit chaotic. So in records, there's no shortage of it. There are attempts. People are saying that there are attempts. I think if we do not have this whole war and the whole scenario prolonging to maybe another few months, we should be out of it. We should be able to float successfully from this crisis.
And if it goes beyond those few months?
Well, then it becomes very difficult, but then it becomes difficult for the whole world, I mean, for the whole region.
Right, but like I said,
it's just not
Bangladesh
us
has
in that sense.
specific sensitivities given the political turmoil that we've seen in the country. So I don't mean to sound like, a horrible cynic here. I'm just genuinely worried for countries where, like I said, as I said, the social ecosystem is fragile.
It is indeed. I mean, the Asian Development Bank, they already mentioned that the regional growth, even if you fix it today, is going to slow down, from 4.6% growth to 4% in 2026. And the worst part is that whenever this crisis happens, it never lands evenly. So it always hits the hardest house or the poorest households the first and the biggest way. So of course, it's going to have an impact if it's prolonged. But as I said, that like what happened in the recent past, it was a unification of the whole country because they all protested together, they all got together, and they all understood that unity is the key over here. So this is another national crisis if it prolongs. We are hopeful that the unity will not break, and together we are a resilient nation, and we will be
Okay.
able to sort this out. That's the general mood at this point.
Okay,
But
let's
with
hope
crisis,
that's
anything can change
sustainable.
very soon.
Exactly, exactly. Robinder, let me ask you then, because the issue is just as much global as it is local, and we're seeing this increasing wealth gap globally. How badly is this really affecting the global dynamics, and does it really bode pretty horribly, I mean, for the future, for everyone?
Oh, absolutely, Andrea. My next book is titled The New World Matrix Under Construction. There's a new world matrix which is under construction. The old order is collapsing, crumbling. Yesterday, the UAE Emirates walked out of the OPEC, right? It's crumbling of those orders. In this new world order, which is emerging, concentration of wealth will lead to more concentration of wealth amongst the wealthy, the ultra wealthy, and the ultra wealthy. What we are seeing also otherwise, if you look at America, it's a club of the rich and powerful which is forming, unfortunately, but that's the nature of the world. The rich and the powerful are, in an informal manner getting together to advance their own interests. That's what's happening. So this gap will, to my mind, unfortunately, increase. And where we are heading, again, not to be a cynic, but yes, if we see, we are heading back to the jungle.
I mean, it's incredibly disturbing because we're looking at, a developing world social dynamics transferred even onto, the United States of America, supposed to be one of the richest country on the planet, and yet we're looking at, Indian style. Would you go as far as to say Indian style wealth gap, or will it not be that extreme?
I think I see this as a trend worldwide. Even in America, the wealth gap is increasing. The rich and the concentration of the wealth, the billions of dollars, trillion-dollar corporations, they're able to invest and reap profits next, which nobody can. Keeping aside even the notion of the romantic startup, how many startups can kind of compete with this? All they need to do is with the money go out and acquire that startup, so that the entire ecosystem remains with the money. So that's a trend we are seeing even in India and all across the world. I mean, from all the research that we are doing. So
Yeah.
that is a trend which is there. Sure, there could be some disruptive technologies which would come, and other disruptions which would come, and well, that's to be seen. But in a broad frame, if you see, I think the next 100 years we are going to see more and more concentration of the wealth amongst the ultra wealthy, and more inequality, unless the disruptions, I hope, emerge in technology, mechanisms, or
Right.
political thought, or ideological kind moves more towards a middle path rather than raw power and raw wealth.
Okay. Froilan, what would that dynamic mean for a country like the Philippines, where the gap is already huge?
Well, that will mean a lot of problems ahead, especially for poorer countries or developing states like the Philippines, wherein there's already an existing disparity between the middle class, for example, and those that are belonging to the marginalized sector. And I think right now the middle class is actually a little bit complaining because they actually are feeling the burden of actually shouldering the impact of the crisis, because a lot of this social amelioration programs are being funneled down to the marginalized sector, while the middle class are not getting anything. So they feel that they are overburdened by the taxation, but they are being
Yeah.
underserved by the government. So I think that that growing unrest is very much apparent, and I think what the people are doing right now, basically, some of them are pinning their hopes. That the government will be able to be a bit more considerate regarding their plight, because right now in the Philippines, transportation, the cost of inflation is really very high. The price of basic commodities is already increasing, and the salaries remains to be stagnant, and this
Right.
really creates a big deal of a problem, especially for the middle class. Yeah.
Yeah, Froilan. Unfortunately, that will have to be the final word for this segment of the Newsmakers, gentlemen, but I'd like to thank sincerely all three of you so much for being with me. Now, if there is an upside to the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, it could be that it expedites a transition to green energy in Asia. Well, joining me now to look at that likelihood is Senior Research Fellow with the China Energy Research Program at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, Anders Hovey. Thank you so much for being with me. Describe what you see as the opportunities here for green energy technology when it comes not just to South and Southeast Asia, but China in particular.
Yeah, energy crises throughout the last 50 years have been a catalyst for a green energy transition worldwide. And I do think that that is playing out to some extent currently with the current crisis. Of course, it depends on how long it lasts and how oil prices do develop. But already, in contrast to previous energy crises, we see a much faster reaction in terms of, for example, exports of clean energy products from China, and in particular to the topic today of exports of those specific technologies to Southeast Asia, to India, South Asia in general. And, these, of course, they're not commodities in the same way that oil and gas are commodities. They are infrastructure that substitutes
Right.
for oil and gas consumption to some extent over a longer term.
That is the thing. It's infrastructure, so you're not infinitely dependent on that relationship with whomever you import this technology from for the long term, or at least you shouldn't be, at least in the case we see with oil and gas dependence, especially in South and Southeast Asia on the Middle East. But if this problem in the Strait of Hormuz is prompting a faster transition to green energy, will it happen fast enough to prevent these economies from really plunging into the economic abyss?
Well, I don't think it's fast enough to affect immediate impacts. And of course, energy crises, they have ripple effects throughout the economy. It's not just the direct impact on the cost to consumers of those energy prices, but the effect on global trade and all of the services that depend on that. So I would say the answer to that, broadly speaking, is negative, but it is enough to make a dent in the actual impact on people's energy consumption and energy prices. And the longer it goes on, the bigger that dent in the impact will be. It will never completely forestall it.
Yeah. Given that China, though, is the primary supplier of these green technologies, do you think it will kind of force certain governments who've been a bit China adverse, the Philippines, for example, to really have to recalibrate their relationship with Beijing?
Well, I think that generally speaking, one of the advantages of clean energy technology is that it's more distributed than traditional energy technologies. And that means that from the diplomatic point of view that you're alluding to, it is entirely feasible to have happened what happened over the last few years in Pakistan, where there's no official change in policy regarding importing, let's say, Chinese solar panels or other clean technologies, but it's happening on the ground with regular people installing rooftop solar. And that's having a major impact on the energy economy of countries in South Asia without necessarily a big government to government relationship change or diplomatic initiative, or for that matter, loans or other agreements that might tie, as you said, these countries financially, economically to China in ways that they might find disturbing.
Right. And the other kind of silver lining could be the potential environmental impact, especially in a country, like India that suffers from some of the most extreme air pollution on the planet. Do you foresee that?
I do. It takes, again, this takes even longer than the earlier question with the economic impact to affect air quality and then, climate change even longer, of course. It depends on what the energy is substituting for. In India, solar energy might not be really substituting for oil and gas. It might be substituting for coal. So that's very helpful. Whereas, in In other countries, it might be substituting more for oil and gas. In island economies, it might be substituting for very local diesel production. And so that's really the very extremely local air pollution.
Yeah.
It could even be at the household level of substitution. So it really depends on the country and on what technology is being substituted. But in general, yes, it does benefit air quality locally.
Okay. And then finally, I mean, how much is China really set to gain here? Because we have to kind of buttress that up against the fact that they have also lost their fuel supplies. I mean, China is less dependent on those imports for its basic energy supplies, but still, it's mattered to China.
Yeah, it clearly matters to China. And interestingly, it comes at a time when China's own domestic deployment of clean energy technologies has been slowing down recently. I'm referring to recently, in the last few months, exports had been more important to China's clean energy industry than before. And I think that was the perception going forward as well. So this clearly helps that industry. But of course, China is affected by oil prices. It's affected by physical supplies of oil. So far, the effect is muted in China compared to all of the other countries we're talking about today. And then the bigger impact on China's economy is the impact on the global trade and global economic growth rates. That affects China much more probably than even energy prices, let alone the solar or wind industries.
Anders Hovey, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers, and thank our viewers for being with us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.